Welcome back to the third and final segment of today's Tax Time show. In this episode, the title is how to open a company in the USA for a foreigner. Foreigner wants to do business in USA. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. Mr. Ajay Kumar explained it very well in the last two segments. So we're going to touch upon more details in this segment. But once again, should you have any tax related question, our email ID is taxtime@tvasiausa.com. All right, so person doesn't have to travel to USA before or during the company open up here in US. We talked about that. Bank account. Is it easy to open a bank account? Because I always thought open a bank account could be a little complicated because you need to have SS number, you need to have a proof of address and whatnot.
You're right. The bank account is tricky. So the bank accounts can be opened under your social security number or under your EIN number. So when you start the business, you get an EIN number. I mean, it typically includes the federal registration, the state registration, labor and the tax registration. As part of the federal registration, you are getting something called EIN, Employer Identification Number. Yes. That number can be used to open the bank account. But a lot of bigger banks, Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, these banks do not really have 100% foreigners opening the company in US unless they are here. They're mid-tier bank like the M&T, Santander, or Bank of Baroda or Amboy Bank. They're the mid-tier bank. They will allow you, especially under the COVID-19 situation, they will allow you to open the bank account remotely. So where you can sign or have a Zoom call or WebEx call where you can be introduced to your banker remotely. And these banks will allow, there are some banks where you can go and open the bank account even on their website. And what you need is the EIN, Federal Identification Number, as opposed to Social Security number.
Okay.
So it's tricky. It's not as straightforward.
But it's doable.
It's very much doable.
Okay. So related to bank account, the next question I have is the merchant services, because nowadays majority of the business is done through credit card processing.
Absolutely. A merchant service account is typically offered by the bank itself.
Yes.
In most cases, the banks will offer the merchant service. If the bank for any reason is not offering the merchant service, or you find that the bank's merchant service is more expensive than what you were expecting, you can always choose to go with third party, First Data, Heartland. There are a lot of plethora of third party merchant service companies that will be happy to work with you through your bank. And they can be combined, they can be linked with your bank account for the merchant service processing.
What is the advisable? Just question comes to my mind. Go through the bank's provided sources?
It depends. It depends your transactional volume. If you are going through the bank, the pros are it's much easier to deal with. You have one party to deal with all your questions.
And then the money is directly into your account.
And money is right there in your account. So it becomes a one-step process, especially if your transactions are not that heavy, because merchant services are certain percentage, 2% roughly give or take of your total collection. But if you are collecting a couple of $1 million every month, then 2% becomes sizable amount. Then in that case, you may want to consider a third party, a cheaper service that's linked to your bank.
So that was well explained about merchant services, and I think that information was needed. Now let's look at the other situation, is that I am all set to start business in USA, open the company in the USA, but I'm not going to have an office or I'm not going to have an employee. Do I need to have a registered agent to do all the paperwork, or I can do it no matter where I am in the world?
Well, no, registered agent must be a local agent. A lot of times people who are starting the business for you, they will act as your registered agent for first year. It's a very, very cheap service. The intent behind the registered agent is if there is any notice from the state or the IRS, the registered agent is supposed to scan those notices and email them to you. So you must have a local US-based registered agent, but it's a fairly inexpensive service.
Okay, registered agent processes your request, all the applications, make sure that you're registered in the state and the federal wise, and also bank account information.
Yes and no. By definition, registered agent is a intermediate communicator who is passing the request from the IRS and the state to you. They're not technically held responsible for processing those requests. If you choose to have this agent, registered agent, process your request, they can do so, or you can choose to process those requests yourself or have a third party process those requests. So the registered agent's responsibility is to being a local communicator who can, consider a situation when you have somebody starting the business in India who doesn't speak English.
Yeah.
Then how does the US government communicates with this foreigner? We can't assume that the whole wide world speaks English at the same level.
Yes.
So this US government, the state government, the local government, the federal government will send a notice to the registered agent, and the registered agent's responsibility is to communicate this message to the relevant owners.
Okay.
Now the owners can choose to have you, the registered agent, process this request or have them done it by somebody
Okay,
else.
so it's good to have registered agent.
You must have the registered
Okay.
agent, Sanjeev ji.
Now let's say, as we talked about earlier, that a person in India wants to open a company. A person who is an Indian or company who is an Indian, the Indian company or Indian person, what's easy for them to start a business in US?
Well, a lot of times the US government will prefer an individual who they can come behind. Going behind a foreign entity is difficult by itself. Going behind an Indian company is going to be a lot more difficult than going behind an Indian person. So the process is going to be a lot easier when you have an Indian person owning the company in US, but a lot of times it makes sense for the Indian company to own the US company. For example, a perfect example is the L1 example, the IT companies. If the same party owns the US company and the Indian company, they give you a hard time. You need to have both companies linked together. So the Indian company owns the US company or the US company owns the Indian company. In that case, you have to have the ownership held by the entity, not by the person.
Interesting. Okay, as we come to an end of the show, anything else you like to add or anything that I missed out asking you?
No, it's a great show, and we want to remind our viewers that if there is anything that we missed, please don't hesitate to write to us. We'll be happy to look into it. Please understand, it's a global market. You are allowed to have a company in US. Give it a shot, give it a try. You wouldn't really know what you could have achieved unless you give it a try.
Absolutely. And for that matter, any question you have, you can reach out to us, texttime@tvasiausa.com. That's our email ID. Mr. Ajay Kumar, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome,
for
Sanjeev.
letting us know about all this. And when we come back next week, as you know, there will be a different topic and a lot more tax-related information coming your way only in the Tax Time Show on TV Asia. I am Sanjeev Pandya, wishing you all happy and tax-free days ahead. So long.